Good afternoon, and welcome to North Orange County Chamber's series of conversations with community leaders. Today, I'm happy to welcome Chief Dunn to our conversations. Chief Dunn joined the Fullerton Police Department in January 2018 after serving with the Anaheim Police Department since 1993 in various capacities. He rose up through the ranks in Anaheim to lieutenant and then transitioned over to our wonderful city. Chief Dunn earned a bachelor degree from California State University, Long Beach, apologizing to all you Titans, and a master's degree from Boise State University. He is a graduate of the Southern California Price School of Policy and Public Policies and Safe Communities Institute, an educational program that provides law enforcement executives with a contemporary approach to public safety by adopting multidisciplinary and whole community methodology. Chief Dunn also sits on the board of directors of the Orange County Crime Stoppers. Welcome, Chief Dunn. Tell us a little bit about yourself and your career as you advanced.
Okay, I kind of knew from a young age that I want to be a police officer. I was born in Nashville, Tennessee. Then I grew up in upstate New York, the Rochester area. And my dad sold uniforms to law enforcement, postal workers, and fire. And so I was exposed to the various careers at a young age, and I kind of identified right away I wanted to be a police officer. And so kind of got focused on that path. In the late 80s, he was transferred here for a job to work at a uniform store in Montebello. And I got a little older and I realized that there was an Explorer program. It's kind of an offshoot of the Boy Scouts of America. And so I joined Explorers on my 14th birthday, which was in 1993 in the City of Anaheim. And I was there until January of 2018. And during my career there, I worked a host of assignments from investigations to patrol, K-9 supervisor, things of that nature. And then I came here in January of 18 as a police captain. And then I'm sure many of you are aware that in August of 18, there was an incident, and I was made the acting chief of police at that time, and then the interim, and then I was actually confirmed as the chief of police in June of last year. So I just finished 1 year as the actual chief of police of the city of Fullerton.
And what an exciting year it's been with lots of new changes. Give us an overview of the Fullerton Police Department and its management, staff, and how it might differ from other police departments throughout the region.
So the Fullerton Police Department is a full-service municipal police organization, and by that I mean we provide all the requisite police services: traffic enforcement, response to calls. We are a PSAP, which is our 911 center for our city, and we also are host to a Type 1 jail facility. So we're a full-service municipal police agency. We are authorized, I should say, there are 150 billets for sworn police officers in the organization. Up until COVID struck, we were funded for 140. Since COVID and our budget shortfalls, we're actually operating around 123 officers. And when you do the math, those 123 actually include the chief of police and the lieutenants that we have in the organization. So when you factor it all in, we have about 103 deployable officers. And I'm told in 2008, there was somewhere around 180. So you can see there's been a drastic change over the years. That we're supplemented and I would say complemented by a host of non-sworn employees. And so in any police department, there's kind of two tracks. There's the sworn law enforcement officers, the ones that have been to the academy and become police officers and are sworn in. And then you can make a whole career out of being a non-sworn member of our department, working in records, being a dispatcher, working in our training unit, towing vehicles, and working in our traffic area. So we have about 70 employees on that side of the house. And so the structure of the department is one police chief, that's me. I'm supposed to have two police captains. I haven't had them since the incident in 2018, and it remains vacant today. We have one part-time person filling in on an as-needed basis, and then I have 5 lieutenants. 4 of them are assigned to patrol, and 1 is assigned to investigations. And then below that rank is sergeant as our frontline supervisors. They run our various units from our gang unit to our investigations, and they're also the supervisors to areas of patrol. And then below that rank, we have corporal, and then our police officers. We also have 1 civilian equivalent manager who manages our records section. and supervisors in both our crime scene investigation and in our dispatch center. So that's kind of an overview of the department as it stands today.
Great, thank you. Before I forget, I do want to remind everybody that we're being broadcast on Facebook Live as well as here through Zoom. So if you have questions, please add them in the chat or the Q&A, and my staff and I are monitoring those, and we'll be asking those periodically throughout the program. So tell us a little bit about the changes that the police department has had to make this summer and fall with, or I should say spring, and we're going into 6 months and more of this COVID-19, and the challenge that it's presenting to the department.
So it's kind of again, this I'll take two tracks on. There's the financial track where we've been affected by budget shortfall from the city, where we've decided to carry additional vacancies to help make our budget numbers. We are going through the process right now of laying off 2 individuals as part of the process. And so we have a budget concern as it relates to that. And then what we found a need to do right away when COVID struck was, it's still our responsibility to provide policing services for the city of Fullerton despite a pandemic. And so we immediately kind of assessed the organization and decided to take our staff and bifurcate them so that if we did have an outbreak of COVID, and thankfully, knock on wood, we didn't have that happen, but we sent all of our detectives to work from home. We, for a time period, they're back in the office now, but they were sent to work from home, and they were to serve as the supplemental force for patrol. So if patrol were to have an outbreak, then we would send those detectives into work patrol for our community. We canceled our mid-watch time period, the people that come in the middle of the day, and we added them to both day and night watch. And so you couldn't cross over. There was no briefing, so that there was no chance for cross-contamination. That was very difficult as we go through our jail process, our booking process, but we identified a way to do that without having that happen. We also utilize our school resource officers to handle those areas where we got complaints from the public that people may not be adhering to the restrictions of COVID or the orders of our public health officer. And so we utilize them in that capacity to go to those kind of areas where we had hot spots or on our trails when we started getting better weather, just to remind people to be so physically distant from each other to help slow the spread. So we had that budgetary concern, and then we also had the personnel concern to make sure, even today, our dispatch center is still walled off from the rest of the department. If they need food or things like that, we actually deliver it to the door, and then we alert them that it's there, and then they come out and get it. So that our dispatch center is a very closed area, and we only have, we're carrying vacancies in there as well. And so if we were to have an outbreak in there, it would be incredibly impactful. So we're still very sensitive to the fact that COVID is still among us. And so even though some of the areas have come back to work in their respective time periods, our dispatch center remains sequestered until this subsides.
Wow. You mentioned that Fullerton has a jail, and I know as part of our leadership program, I've had a chance to tour that jail. Is it typical for a city of our size to have its own jail as we have, or is that something that's rather unusual to Fullerton?
I would say it's nearly typical. And by that, I mean, if you were to build a jail from the ground up today, it would be incredibly difficult to meet all of the tenants that are in place for building a new facility. But because we have a jail facility that has been here since, even if you look back to 1936, I think is when they designed the building, there was a jail facility even when it was City Hall. And so through the years, we've remained current with the BSCC, which is the state agency that does the inspections of our facility. And what that does for the community is kind of twofold. If we were to make an arrest and we didn't have a jail, we would have to drive everyone to Santa Ana and to book them at the county jail. And that would take our officers out of Fullerton and send them to Santa Ana. And if there were 3 or 4 or 5 officers there, there would be few people left here to patrol the city. So it's a kind of a necessary luxury to have, given the size of our city and the activity that we have in our city. One of the things, though, that was very challenging when I first got here was we had very difficult time finding staff for the jail, and our budget didn't support adding any additional staff. So we had basically enough people for one person to work every shift, and we were having to fill vacancies with overtime, or if we had planned operations, we'd have to bring somebody in who was jail trained on overtime. We actually put out an RFP and selected a firm, and now we actually outsource the staffing portion of our jail to a company called G4S, and they take care of everything. If someone calls in sick, a G4S staff member comes in. So it doesn't impact our deployment model as it had in the past. So it's one of the big changes we made probably in the last 16 months or so.
That sounds like a big change. And I understand that you've mentioned financial constraints a number of times. What are some of the other programs or projects or changes that you've made to help stem some of the financial challenges, and what do you see in the future as solutions for that?
So some of the credit, or a lot of the credit, needs to go to previous city councils who were kind of forward thinking as it relates to one of the things that I hear a lot about in the community is our pensions. And so some years ago, long before I arrived in Fullerton, the council made a policy that they would not honor what PERS calls a classic formula. So at one point, PERS adopted a 3% at 50 model. And if you were an incumbent employee at the time that was adopted, you became a 3% or classic member. There's a tier to that called tier 2, which is 3% at 55. That allows for the city to have a little bit more time, and therefore the unfunded pension liability comes down. And then there was, of course, PEPRA, which was the 2.7 at 57 model. So Fullerton, if you are an incumbent police officer in the county who was a classic member, we do not honor 3% at 50, we honor 3% at 55. And that was done to try to kind of bring down that unfunded pension liability number. What knock-on effect that has is it doesn't allow us to compete well in the lateral market. And a lateral officer is someone who was trained and working somewhere else in the county or in the state as a police officer, and they'd like to come to Fullerton. If you're a classic member, you'd have to instantly sign up to work 5 additional years. And so we find that that's an impediment to getting lateral police officers. And that's important to us today because a vast majority, 60% or so of our patrol force has about 2.9 years on. So that makes them a very young department. That's good for the financial side because most of them then are PEPRA members and therefore not contributing greatly to that kind of unfunded pension liability. But at the same time, in 2017 and 2016, 2017, we lost 27 police officers to various agencies that surround us for pay and benefit reasons. And so we had to fill those with officers. And the only way that we could do that was by hiring new, which means we have to go through the hiring process. And from the time that we start that to the time the officer hits the streets and actually counts as a number in our patrol force is about 18 months. And so it makes it tremendously difficult to get our numbers where they need to be effective. And so I think it's good in the fact that we were very budget conscious here, but it is a negative in a way because we're constantly having to go through the hiring process. And like I mentioned before, through the years, we've seen our numbers dwindle. If it was at 180 at one point, when I got here, we were authorized for 150. Short time after I arrived, remember I mentioned that 27 people had left, and we identified that between the years of 7 and 14, that was the years of experience we were losing from our department. And so with the blessing of our council and the work from our Police Officers Association, we were able to come to an agreement where 10 of those positions from 140 to 150 were defunded, and the monies from that were utilized to give a raise to people in that 7 to 14 year range. But one of the things that the city did, again, as trying to be a good shepherd of the funding, was they sent that plan to an actuarial company who indicated what the unfunded liability would be. And so that money was taken off the top and put into an interest account that could be used to pay down that unfunded liability. So we try to minimize the impact to the city's budget. And so we're always looking for creative ways to retain, attract the best of the best, and doing so within the confines of our budget.
I think one of the things that always surprises people as I talk with them is that Fullerton is one of the largest cities in the county with a population of well over 135,000. One of the things I believe that comes with the larger cities is some issues with gangs and gang enforcement. Tell us a little bit about some of the gangs that are in Fullerton and how the police department addresses that.
Sure. Fullerton is an old city, meaning we've been around a long time, since the late 1800s. And with that, over time has come we have seen gangs take hold in certain neighborhoods and traditional street gangs. And so Fullerton has always been very active in its enforcement of our gang neighborhoods. We do that through partnerships. We do that through intelligence gathering. We do that through enforcement, or what I call street level interdiction. And so we have a fairly small unit for a city our size. We have one sergeant and two investigators assigned in there. And we found that we get the maximize that efficiency by partnering with federal agencies that help us with weapons violations and things of that nature that we know the gang members engage in. We've had cases that have taken us as far away as Oklahoma for a Fullerton gang member who moved out of the area but found that it was easier to procure firearms there and was sending them back to Fullerton to be on our streets. And so with our partnership with the feds, we were able to go there and make arrests and impact the quality of life here in Fullerton. And then we also have one investigator assigned to the Orange County Violent Gang Task Force. And why that's important is because it avails us to a host of services from other agencies throughout the county. So when we do large-scale operations in our city related to gang enforcement, we can draw on resources that we wouldn't otherwise have if we didn't participate in the group. And so it makes those operations safer, more efficient. And so you will see our gang officers out there doing street level enforcement. Most of the time they're out there gathering information, talking to neighbors, talking to gang members, and getting a feel for what's going on our streets. The other thing that they do very well is liaison with our neighboring cities, because while there could be problems between two gangs within Fullerton, oftentimes we find that neighboring cities gangs will come in here, or our gang members will go to neighboring cities. And so it's important that there's this kind of loose jurisdictional boundary that these are investigators and investigators from surrounding cities can participate in, so that we can better affect crime in our neighborhoods. And so I think, although small, our gang unit is fairly strong and does a good job of it. And we do that with a real eye towards partnering with the community to make effective change.
Yeah, it's amazing that a city like ours has a rather large population of gang members that many people aren't even aware. One of the policies that was implemented, and Fullerton was one of the first that I'm aware of to really implement the use of body cameras. And now we're hearing about their use throughout the country in really curbing some of the police violence and other issues that have come up with police. Tell us a little bit about how body cameras have worked in the city of Fullerton, and any pluses or minuses that you see in the implementation of them.
Sure. So body cams came kind of as a result, or just after the Kelly Thomas incident that happened in town. And I was in Anaheim at the time, and I know that Anaheim was in kind of competition with Fullerton to see who could deploy the body-worn cameras the quickest. So I think what we settled on was Fullerton deployed them first, Anaheim purchased them first, so they basically both people got it first. That's neither here nor there for me. For me, they're an essential tool to policing, and especially this day and age. I think over time and very quickly, that technology was embraced by officers because they realize its impact on how we can, one, I think it holds us accountable, but it also provides the public a look into what we experience when we go into these types of situations. And so it was implemented here. When I got here, again, I always talk about these two tracks. With that technology comes a very large budget price tag. And really the major cost is in storage of the data. And so when I got here, we were actually double what we paid for in data. And at that time, Axon hadn't charged us for our overage, but they were planning on when we renewed our contract. And so we worked with them, and we worked with the city to get the funding to now we have unlimited storage, so we can continue using them, because one of the things that I would hate to do would be to have them and then have to discontinue their usage because I couldn't afford to pay for the bill. And so we have that in our budget for the next 5 years at least. And what that also did was through programs that Axon supports, we were able to get brand new tasers for the whole department, which we otherwise couldn't have afforded. We also get the newest iteration of cameras twice throughout the contract period. So we found that Axon is a good partner. The other thing that it does for us by having this program is and this is something that I think most people would miss, is in our civilian side, that's a side of the department that isn't sworn, but is just as essential. We have to provide discovery in criminal cases. And so prior to the implementation of body-worn cameras, we had to make videos ourselves and copies and send it up to court. Now, through the use of the cloud storage, we are able to just share links with the DA's office and they can download the data. So it takes far less time and is less laborious for our staff to comply with all of the measures that go with filing a case. And so I think for us, it's an efficiency thing. We're leveraging technology to get the most out of our money.
It also probably helps the chain of transfer of evidence and make sure that there's no alterations in those videos or anything else.
Yes, everything has an audit trail. You can see who's watched it for how long, if there were any changes made, and all of that goes to court with it, so that on the defendant side, they can see all that as well. And I would be remiss to say that if I didn't say that we're the first city in Orange County that produced videos in critical incidents to share with the community, and we wouldn't have the footage to show if we didn't have body-worn cameras. So I feel that they're vitally important to policing, especially this day and age. And as long as I'm here and I can get the support, which I've had so far, we'll keep them.
Great. I know that one thing that people often remark on is the amount of activity in our downtown. I'm sure that's changed a little bit with the COVID and the distancing and the regulations on bars and restaurants, but tell us a little bit about how that has maybe shifted. And now you're enforcing COVID regulations and new things, and how the downtown really impacts the police department here in Fullerton.
Sure. For quite some time now, the police department has had a unit that is, their purpose is to work the downtown area on the busy nights, Thursday, Friday, Saturday nights. And it's a 2-officer group that reports to a sergeant that has patrol duties. And the officers also work patrol when the downtown area is not as busy as you would expect. But their job is to really liaison with the business owners. And we've found, at least since I've been here, that our restaurant owners and our business owners downtown are very good partners to the Fullerton Police Department. We value that relationship greatly. When I came here, there was an effort afoot by our community development area to create a downtown specific zone and some rules that went with that as far as noise and lighting and all those things. And so I think what has been very helpful of late in our dealings with downtown is we have the police department participating, we have community economic development participating, we have code enforcement participating, and we've all given staff to that effort so that it's a cohesive effort and it's directed effort rather than a complaint coming into PD handling, and then the same complaint going across the street and they're handling it and we're duplicating efforts. And then sometimes I think that led to people believing that the problem was larger than it was because the volume of complaints seemed high, but it was kind of duplicative efforts. So I think we're very much here in the city now focused on being unified in our response to those types of things. And prior to COVID, our downtown was still very vibrant as it has been over the years. When COVID struck, it was, I think, a large blow to our downtown area. And we certainly empathize with the business owners down there and have tried to be partners with them throughout this process. And where I have found they have been excellent is when we have gotten complaints of people out of compliance. And again, for many of us, that landscape of what's allowed and what's not allowed is always changing with the different orders that we see from our health officer. And so our posture has been more of seeking education and compliance prior to any type of enforcement. And every time we've ever been to a location where we've had a complaint and we've liaisoned with the business owner or the on-duty manager, we have had 100% compliance. And people have been so supportive and understanding of our position in that process as well. And I think our officers have been supportive and understanding of the position of the business owner throughout that entire process. It's very difficult to make it today, and we understand that fully. And so our job is to make sure that people who are patronizing those areas are safe and that we're not contributing in any way to the spread of COVID. And at the same time, understanding that in order for our businesses to survive this pandemic, that they need to thrive. And the best way we can partner with them to help that happen at this time is kind of what we're committed to. And we're doing that in partnership with our partners over at City Hall.
In addition to the downtown area, what do you find is the major area, if you can isolate one, of calls that you do get as a police department?
It would seem a lot of our time is spent responding to homelessness. And when I say homelessness, it's kind of runs the gamut from calls for service. And again, homelessness in and of itself is not illegal, but sometimes our homeless neighbors engage in behavior that is illegal, and that requires a police response. And so complaints that I get to my office are about seeing congregations of homeless, especially in our parks of late, and we're launching a new program to try to help with that. Um, and I would say the second biggest complaint I get is in traffic. And I think this is something that for people to understand too. In a city our size, like you mentioned, we have 2 police motorcycle officers in our city. That's all we can afford to field right now. And so where I sense a lot of frustration, at least right now, is from people who email me about a particular traffic issue that they're having, and it is sent to our motor officers. They're just triaging them with the other calls that they're getting and trying to get to the areas where they can be most effective, since there's only 2. As a comparison, about 10 years ago, or maybe 08, 09, there was somewhere around 15 motors in our city. So as the years have gone down, we've dwindled and dwindled, and it makes us, I think it frustrates the residents. So I try to, whenever I have an opportunity to address people, to help manage expectations by letting them know what kind of resources we have to do that. That doesn't mean our patrol officers can't contribute. It's just our patrol officers are tied to going to calls, and when they have downtime, they will assist with those traffic complaints that we get. But we can talk about homelessness for a second if you'd like me to expand on that.
Sure, I think that's an important issue that definitely we have not had a chance to address today.
So the Fullerton Police Department has 2 full-time homeless liaison officers, and what that means is it's those officers' full-time duty to respond to and address issues relating to homelessness. And it isn't, and you'll notice what I didn't mention is enforce as it relates to homelessness. I'm a firm believer, and I think many in our profession are, that we're not going to arrest our way out of the homelessness issue in our communities. And so for that reason, we need to, as law enforcement, retool how we approach that and look at it more like providing outreach and incentive for folks to get onto a path of success. And so I believe that our homeless liaison unit is second to none. Those officers that are assigned to it select to be on that, in that group. They test to be in that group, and they go out there every day. They know the homeless population knows them, and they can have conversations. And what we found is you can't let up, right? You can't get tired of talking to the same people and getting what you would perceive as nowhere, because sometimes on the 10th visit, they will accept services and we can start getting them on a path to success. So we keep it up. It's not just our officers. We do it in partnership with a group, different groups of people. One of them is the Orange County Healthcare Agency. They provide us a clinician who is a mental health clinician and will come with us to those calls where someone is in mental health crisis, or when we get reports of individuals who are in crisis, or people we've worked with through the years that have kind of been on a cycle of they're on their medication for their mental health issue and then they go off of it, and then it creates calls for service. We can go and check in with those folks to make sure that they're still on the right track, and so that they don't generate calls for service. And so that's an excellent partnership to have. And then we also partner with a company called CityNet, which provides our homeless outreach. And why they're important is they serve as kind of the gateway between our street level outreach and getting someone into some sort of shelter or permanent supportive housing. And so CityNet has been around for quite some time and has a great reputation in the business. And so they will ride with our officers throughout the week and go out and do outreach. And our officers are merely there to make sure the situation is safe, so the experts in the field of homelessness can go and interact with our homeless neighbors. Now, there are times when they go out by themselves if they're comfortable. And so we partner with them to make sure that we're being as effective as possible with their services and trying to get to reach as many of our homeless neighbors as possible. The other things that Fullerton has done is partnered with the city of Placentia and the city of Buena Park with their development of their shelters, which are both now open. And for this is a question I get a lot. That doesn't mean that today we can start enforcing our camping ordinances, which have been put on hold because of a federal court case. There is a whole process we have to go through to start doing enforcement, and we're working through that now, which includes working with attorneys from a lawsuit that we entered into with the rest of the North Orange County area. And we have very prescribed measures we have to undertake before we can get there. And we're working through that now. So I know that people have seen that those shelters have come online and there was an expectation that things were going to start. They have started, but we're still working through that process with the federal judge and the attorneys to get us to the finish line in that area.
I think the addition of the two shelters in Buena Park and Placentia have made a huge impact on our community. Many of us have seen the homeless situation decline. Um, have you experienced on the policing level a major impact from that as well?
We do. Remember I talked earlier in the gang enforcement area about this kind of cross-jurisdictional conversation that happens. It happens in the homeless area too. It also happens with our partners at the California Highway Patrol because our state areas interstate, along the freeways, people will call about them, and that's under the jurisdiction of the California Highway Patrol. And so there is this constant conversation going on amongst law enforcement as it relates to homelessness and congregations of homeless to try to get them help. And so yes, we have seen some of our homeless neighbors take the shelter beds that are in both Buena Park and Placentia. We do have another one coming online within the city of Fullerton on West Commonwealth that will also assist with that. I think the other important distinction to make too, and why that cross-jurisdictional conversation is important, is because when other cities take steps to impact homelessness, sometimes it displaces our homeless neighbors and they end up coming into our community. And so we try to be prepared to receive them and get them whatever help they're willing to accept. And then I think it's important too to say during COVID-19, the governor has suspended any type of enforcement on the state areas. So a lot of times when you're getting on the 91 freeway at Harbor, you'll see encampments. Those areas are the jurisdiction of the CHP, and they're suspended from taking any type of action there right now during COVID. So I just want to make sure people understand why they're seeing that.
Fullerton over the years has really experienced its more than its share, I think, but its share of protests, including earlier this summer, the protests over the death of George Floyd. Please describe a bit about your approach and how you handle this protest and others to make sure that Fullerton citizens remain safe.
Sure. I'm a firm believer that it's law enforcement's job to help facilitate people's First Amendment rights to protest while making sure that our community is safe and goes without damage or any type of other adverse reaction to someone's exercising their First Amendment rights. And so our posture is always that of collaboration. I know that sounds weird to say law enforcement would collaborate with a group of folks who are trying to protest, but I can give you a couple examples where it's been incredibly successful, and then I can give you an example where we didn't have as much success in that, and then we saw interaction between law enforcement and the protesters. So we had, what I would say, over the course of several weeks, several protests. There were three fairly significant ones. The very first one that we had, we were given information that there would be a protest that would assemble over by the transportation center. We did what I asked my staff to do was reach out to the organizers and see if they'd be willing to meet with us, not to thwart them and not to tell them that they couldn't protest, but to say, hey, welcome to Fullerton. I know you're here to protest. However, there is a framework in which we operate under. Don't take over the street, don't damage property, don't steal things, don't vandalize. And I would say, I'm going to use a round number, there were 100 protesters, 50 of which were incredibly receptive and wanted to interact with us, and we gave them the flyers with the framework on it. We actually had one of our sergeants give them their number, and they had some communication. The other 50 protesters were clearly anti-law enforcement, and we got that through their gestures. And so when that protest decided to march, our initial posture was to facilitate the march and help them not get hit by vehicles that were not expecting people to be walking through the roadway. Well, they actually marched twice. And after the first time they finished, the 50 people that were really receptive to law enforcement interaction left, and we were left with those who didn't like us. And then we had an incident where someone's windshield was broken, and then we had one protester who decided that she wanted to be arrested and communicated that to the officers. And so we did have to deploy and make an arrest in that case. And those were the two arrests we made at that particular protest. Subsequent to that, we had two other protests of over 1,500 people each, both of which the organizers were incredibly communicative to us. Although they may not agree with law enforcement or may not like law enforcement, they were certainly cordial enough for us to have a conversation, exchange information. And I would say the success of both of those was because the organizers were committed to being lawful. And so we were able to, if we were monitoring and we saw someone go on the street and block cars, we could text the organizer and they would send somebody out and move the person out of the street. And so we didn't experience any type of damage or violence as it related to those. They did march, and some in the community would say that that's illegal, and it is, except for by us following them and blocking off the streets for just a few moments, they were able to make their march, and then they were ready to go home. And so in order to help facilitate their rights while impacting our residents the least, we elected to assist them with that. And both of those went without conflict with law enforcement, which is our goal.
We've certainly seen outcomes different than other parts of the country, and I really commend you for that, and to be able to resolve some of those things effectively and with the least impact on our citizens. You mentioned a number of times, and we've heard it before, that the growth of your department, or the filling of vacant positions, is really going to impair what you can do moving forward. How do you see this moving in the future, and do you see any cure to it down the line?
Well, I think in the short term, I'm hoping for some sort of relief as it relates to COVID, maybe from the federal government. And I know those things are being monitored, and hopefully there's something there, because it's COVID that really brought on kind of a quicker onset of some financial woes, at least for this department, and is causing us to hold vacancies, which is incredibly impactful. When you talked about those protests, one of the questions that I got through the town halls I did in subsequent to those protests was, you use so much overtime and why are you using so much overtime? The fact of the matter is, we have a responsibility to police the city of Fullerton, and it takes police officers to do that. We do the very best we can to minimize the use of overtime, but we have been in every area of our department slowly reducing the numbers of officers that we have in there. We have 10 detectives assigned to investigations in total. When I got here, there was 15, and in its heyday, there was probably 25. And so when we have one homicide, then we need all 10 detectives, because there's so many facets to that investigation that need to get done. And so there's going to be overtime when we do that. And so as we dwindle the numbers, we fill the void with our officers working more and collecting the overtime. And so my hope would be some sort of relief in the short term from the federal government as it relates to maybe CARES Act funding or something like that to help us get through this. And then long term, is really our policymakers and our city leadership have to sit down and figure out how we're going to be able to fund those types of things going forward.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate all the time you've given me today. As we get ready to close, is there anything that I have forgotten to ask you, or that you wanted to say, or any comments that you would like to add to your previous discussion?
No, I just wanted to say thank you very much for having me today. And I also wanted to thank the Fullerton community. I really feel like our community supports us, and we're happy to be a partner with our community, and we thank them for their support.
Is there anything the community can do to further support your activities? Are there things the officers need that they can assist with, or just the moral support and the verbal support of the community to help boost those officers?
I think the moral support is a big key right now, especially. I think continue to do what our community has done since at least I've been here. Communicate with us, lay out your expectations, do so with a willingness to have dialogue about it. I think that's huge. And so I've been impressed with our community as it relates to their interaction with law enforcement. And I welcome the opportunity to keep that line of communication open with the community. So communicate with us, call us, and maybe, I guess at the end, I would say maybe exercise just a tad of patience, because we're doing the best we can with what we have. And your complaints about issues in your neighborhood or traffic related don't go unnoticed. It's just, we're doing the best we can with what we have.
Right, a great opportunity to remind all of us that your resources are spread thin, but that you're doing a great job. So thank you so much, Chief Dunn. I welcome all of you to come back again next week as we have a conversation with Meg McWade. Meg McWade is Director of Public Works for the City of Fullerton, overseeing waters, streets, sewers, and everything else that you can and can't see throughout our community. So come back out again next Thursday and we'll have a conversation with her. Until then, thank you again.
Thank you. Take care, everyone.